Welcome to the session on creating the copilots that your marketing team will actually thank you for. So before we get going, we'll do a little bit of housekeeping. So this will help us align the talk track and the level of detail that we'll go to based on the audience. Right? So one of the most important things for us here is to avoid turning this into a webinar as much as possible. Okay, so please raise your hands. We'll pause. Let's make this a conversation. Don't hesitate to ask questions. This is not a normal session. Don't hold your questions till the very end. If you have a question about something that you're looking at, raise your hand, throw out a question. It's a relatively small room. We can just simply ask questions. Okay. So first, I'd like to recognize my two beautiful daughters in the back. They're going to score us after the session. By the raise of hand, who here is non-technical? So on the marketing side, on the content side, do we have anyone like that? Okay, excellent. Now, by the raise of hand, who is here at the architect level, or managerial level, or director level, or above on the tech side? Okay, good. Perfect. Okay, so about half. Okay, so we'll try to balance that. So, but again, if you have any questions, please don't hesitate. Raise your hand. All right, so before we jump in, we'll do a quick round of introductions. And my name is Vasiliy Fomichev. I'm a co-founder of ZonDigital. I'm the head of AI solutions. ZonDigital, I've been around the Sitecore space for quite a long time, over 17 years. I've been a Sitecore VP for the past 11 years across ambassador, commerce, and technology categories. So it's been a minute since Sitecore specialized across their entire portfolio. Not only I'm specialized in Sitecore, I'm also specialized in other platforms, although Sitecore has been near and dear to me for the past 17 years. I'm also specialized in Acquia, Optimizely, Content AI, Contentful, and AI-wise, which has been the focus for me for the past 3.5 years or so. Been spending quite a bit of time with Azure and OpenAI as platforms, not necessarily models. And joining me today, Martin Miles, and I'll let him introduce himself.
And welcome. My name is Martin Miles. I'm also Sitecore MVP 9 times so far. I am a person all about XM Cloud these days. For the past 3 years, I am exclusively dealing with XM Cloud, drilling into all the nuances, all the aspects. Many of you probably saw my daily postings on LinkedIn with the advices about tips and tricks which you can do for the XM Cloud. However, many of you may know me through the community because I do a lot of community effort these days. I'm running 2 popular user groups. The one is well-known headless development user group, and the other is regional for Los Angeles. And those of you who are using Telegram Messenger also know me as the guy behind Sitecore Telegram channel. If you have Telegram Messenger, please subscribe. There's lots of insight there. So that was me, Vasiliy.
Thanks, Martin. The company we represent is ZonDigital. We are AI-led company, the only Sitecore partner that is built from the ground up with AI in mind for its operation. So AI is infused in everything that we do on a daily basis. So AI has been near and dear to us, specialized AI, generative AI, machine learning in general. We have machine learning engineers on staff. So this is the biggest differentiator from everyone else. So while other partners are accelerating the same steps of the same process, we reinvent the process, getting to the same outcome faster with higher quality. Right, we're also the creators of Shift AI. So this is the only automated way to migrate from XD to XM Cloud with scripting and artificial intelligence. This is a joint project that was started with Sitecore with the previous CEO, David Flanagan, and it's off operation this summer. So we're fully aware that we're standing between you and the happy hour. So here's what you can expect in the next 40 minutes or so, right? So we'll first introduce the process, high-level process, how to get started on selecting the use cases for creating copilots or agentic AI automation. Okay? Then we'll take a look at the architecture. We'll start at the high level, we'll drill in further with more detail. Again, This will be the time to ask as many technical questions as you possibly can. Then Martin will show us how to build a copilot. So we'll walk you through the steps of building a copilot. So the idea here is for you to understand what it takes to build a simple copilot that will execute an operation next on cloud through a chat interface. And then we'll talk about a few things that frequently get left behind, however, that are important for you as someone working with AI, doing any sort of model engineering, LLM engineering, or AI engineering before releasing that to production, which is security and evaluations. So let's get started with the first section. So the first thing that we want to align on is the definition of an AI copilot. There's so many different terms floating around: copilots, agents, assistants, right? So all of that, in some shape or form, can be referencing the same things. However, the context in which we'll be looking at a copilot in this session is a specialized digital assistant capable of making intelligent decisions and executing tasks. So that second portion is extremely important. Intelligent decision and task execution. Right? So anytime we work with clients, their first knee-jerk reaction when they think about agentic AI is automating their regular processes. Automation has been around for a long time. We'll talk about that too. So automation that we are focusing on here for copilots and AI, it has to do specifically with automating intelligent decision making. So that is the first thing that you want to keep in mind when you're looking for optimizing processes. Look for those processes that are non-deterministic, that require decision making. In fact, if I were to give you kind of a rule of thumb for finding processes to be optimized, is think if you could explain a process to a person with a teenager's level of maturity and attention span, but at PhD level knowledge, that is a good candidate for automating with AI or for a copilot creation. Right? So look for those use cases that span an entire workflow. Right? There are plenty of tools out there that solve individual problems, small problems. What that's called, it's called microtask optimization. Optimizing a microtask will likely not result in the entire workflow moving faster, because business processes have upstream, downstream dependencies, parallel dependencies, right? So automating just one leg, one step in the process will likely only allow that person to browse Facebook a little longer, right? But it's not going to reflect on the P&L. It's definitely not going to reflect on the top or the bottom line, right? So look for a process, an entire process, to optimize with a copilot. Another reason for looking to optimize an entire workflow, an entire process, as opposed to a simple step in the process, is because LLMs require sometimes, and well, a lot of time, extensive context to produce an accurate output. So in a lot of ways, a lot of times, in a lot of business scenarios, simply putting that context together manually will eliminate all the cost savings you're going to get out of the copilot. Right? So this is where the creating a copilot needs to include the entire workflow from end to end, from start to finish. This is where you carry the context all the way through to the end. So here are some more tips on creating a copilot. So first, unlike what you will like hear in the news and what the leadership may say, where they want to use AI to do more, we, on our own experience, have seen the opposite. All of our projects around automation and operational automations have been focused on reducing the cost, even though the leadership says differently. So if you're approaching this in a pragmatic fashion, unless your leadership advocates differently and really pushes for moving that top line up, look for workflows that can help to bring the bottom line down, the cost. Look for workflows that have a clear description defined. So this is where the clients with highly regulated industries would excel with creating copilots, because they have a clearly defined set of standard operating procedures. So if you don't have a standard operating procedure, it's probably not going to be the best workflow workload to automate. If you have those standard operating procedures in your head, write them down before moving forward to make sure that you have all the use case and edge cases thought through. Once you have the list of ideas, calculate the ROI for each idea. So this is especially important if you're starting to do something internal. You're trying to get the team bought in. For instance, you're trying to get your marketing team interested or your technology team interested in automation with AI. Calculate the ROI. Make sure the ROI is valid for the team that you're building it for. A lot of cases you may know in large enterprises, cost structures can vary, cost centers can vary depending on the task and the operation that's produced. Simple example, we automated creative design recently, and one of the conversation was where we eliminated the need for a designer for image touch-up. And the cost for that, even though the images were going to marketing, the cost for that was actually coming out of a different department, communications, right? There is a large portion that was touching marketing though, so the ROI was still positive. But that's an example where what you think might help marketing will not actually touch their bottom line. So make sure to calculate the ROI correctly. One important thing, before jumping into AI or going to AI, there are certain things that we want to consider. AI has become sort of a hammer that everyone's trying to use for every problem that they see. Now, AI is not meant to solve all your problems. In fact, there are a lot of problems that can be solved through other things, like simply organizing your data, structuring your data, using statistical models. Lots of problems can be solved with that. In fact, the majority of problems can be solved with simple statistics. And what companies usually think is that the curve for ROI is a straight line. We've done some data organization, we've done some statistical modeling, we're going to expect a similar bump or maybe even a higher bump with AI. Unfortunately, the reality is more like this, where the real value comes from the statistics, and then from the AI automation, you get a slight bump. This is an important point to keep in mind. So before jumping to AI, make sure you've looked at other ways to solve the problem. Through structured data, through automation. RPA has been around for a long time, right? Robotic process automation. There are lots of things that may appear like good candidates for solving with AI. However, they're not because they're deterministic. Again, going back to the definition, we want to look for cases that require intelligent decision making. Okay? So here are some of the cases. These are the things that we have seen. Personally, we've had projects around them. We know these cases bring real value done right. Positive ROI for marketing. From the operation perspective, content editorial. We had a project that helped eliminate 4 content editors within a company. Editorial, where copy comes in, we have to rewrite it based on company guidelines, writing style guide, making sure we're respecting the taxonomy, right? So all those things taken into account, usually done and checked manually by the editorial, can be easily automated. In fact, ChatGPT version 5, or OpenAI model version 5, has been trained on the Associated Press style guide, writing style guide. So that gives you a jump start if you're working with the US market. Creative asset adjustments for compliance. So this is something that I already mentioned. This is an easy one to solve as well. Not necessarily with generative AI. If you're working with pixel perfect imaging, we don't want to generate images from scratch most of the time. What we want to do is use other types of AI models and machine learning to make creative adjustments to images. So we have to be really careful about generating images from scratch because of copyright infringement. Automated brand governance, scanning your brand channels. This is a problem, a larger problem for multi-regional organizations, where each region has their own marketing departments. They sort of run wild, doing their own thing. The centralized office, versus here is with one of our clients, FA Consulting, they're struggling, they were struggling to keep sort of herding the cats in the regional offices, the regional marketing offices, to stay compliant with the data branding guidelines. So this is an example of an agentic workflow or a copilot that can help with that. Brief ideation and creation. You saw a demo if you visited the keynote for brief creation. That is one area where marketing spends a lot of their time. A lot of research, a lot of back and forth, a a lot of ideation. Automating that will generate massive value, and that's why Sector's been talking about it so much. Campaign ROI forecasting, similar to brief generation. Once the brief is generated, usually there's a financial analysis that comes with that. Automating that process is also extremely helpful for marketing teams. Social listening is actually something, well, the second and third, this is something that we're also doing internally. Social listening for marketing teams, scanning social channels, especially here in the B2C business, where you're keeping the finger on the pulse of your clients, scanning the social channels, analyze for certain types of messages, analyzing those messages based on certain criteria, let's say forwarding those messages or replying to them. Conversational analytics, asking your data for information. Right? So moving away from static reports, moving towards conversational data and auto report generation. So for instance, if there's an anomaly in traffic, something drops, instead of spending days and weeks on trying to investigate it, crawling through Google Analytics and explorations, you can simply ask a question and get an answer for that. So massive cost savings and time savings. Metadata generation, content summarization, multi-channel content production. These are some of the other use cases that are beneficial in the content space. Notice we're staying away from content generation in general for multiple reasons. One of the reasons is copyright infringement. Second reason is, if you're a serious business, you probably don't want your content to be fully generated by AI. Right? So there are certain things that we can trust AI to do, certain things we want to stay away from. What we definitely want to stay away from is something that would result in a negative curve of value. What we want to do is ideally build copilots and automation that has an upward trajectory in their value. That means the more we use it, the more the copilot learns, the better it becomes, the higher the ROI. We want to avoid the use cases that have a flat curve. For instance, auto scheduling for calendars. You can't schedule a meeting any better than you can just schedule a meeting, right? There's a ceiling. Once you accurately figured out the model that can schedule a meeting, the only risk here is a wrong schedule, overbooking. But but you're limited at the top level, right? So that's an example of a flat line. There's some also negative use cases that can drop the value of the copilot the more you use it. So stay away from those. All right. So now that we understand how to pick use case, so let's talk about the architecture. So what goes into a copilot? So we talked about a copilot being a specialized assistant that can help us make intelligent decisions and task execution. So there are 4 layers. We'll start at the high level, and we'll start from down further, right? There are 4 layers to a copilot, in simple terms. There's the user interface, that's the interface the marketing teams will be interacting with. Usually you want to pick a tool that's familiar to them that they're already using. Usually the go-to is Teams if you're on the Microsoft stack. Slack is another good option. Microsoft Copilot is usually bogged down. However, if it's available, great user interface, great user experience. Cypher also has an interface in Cypher Stream if you're using that tool. Now, we need a workflow management tool to connect our user interface to our models, to our actions, to our systems. This is where we choose a workflow management system. So we have a few options here. So we can either go with an MCP server, whether it's private or public, or choose a workflow tool. And the trade-off here is that if we want privacy security, we want to build an MCP internally, keep it private. If we want usability, speed to market, accessibility, any of the publicly available workflow tools, or a Cypher MCP, for instance, that was released earlier this week, is available for use. Easy to get started with, user-friendly, however, we're sacrificing some things with that as a result. Systems. Any system in your MarTech stack. Any system that we can connect to using APIs or direct calls, for instance, SQL databases. And then finally, models. There are plenty of services out there. Most likely, however, you'll find yourself in the area of Azure. Right? You can go directly to a model provider like OpenAI, Anthropic, Google. However, unless you're on a Google stack, you're most likely going to go Azure, Microsoft Foundry AI that has connectors to multiple models, right? So we can use those same models, foundation models, through Azure AI Foundry. Now, when building a copilot internally within your organization, you're most likely going to use an MCP server. So we talked about an MCP versus a workflow tool, right? So when you're building something for the internal team, you're likely going to prioritize privacy and security. That's one of the biggest things that prevent AI adoption are concerns about privacy and security. Right, so we'll talk about that on the production release slides. So MCP service, MCP, if you're not familiar with it, stands for Model Context Protocol. So this is a protocol that was developed to allow large language models to communicate with tools and use tools. Before MCP, generative AI could only advise, could recommend, could generate text images. They couldn't take action on those recommendations. Right? All they could do is tell us what to do, and they would have to do that manually. So MCP allows us to connect our AI models to the tooling to actually take action based on their decision making. Okay? So that's a standardized way of doing that. The three primitives you want to be aware of is tools, resources, and prompts. Really simple. Tools are connectors that connect the server to the MarTech systems, whether it's your CMS, your database, your CRM, your BigQuery for analytics, and so forth, right? For task execution. And we have resources. These are the systems that you connect to provide additional context. Again, the output of a large language model or a small language model, a model in general, is going to depend on how accurate the context is. So we want to make sure we give it enough context, right, for it to provide the most accurate output. And then finally, prompts. These are the prompts. These are the pre-built instructions that translate our language, natural language, into parameters and commands, into specific instructions to execute. Right? So these are the three areas of MCP. Now, one thing to be careful about is you'll hear MCP name thrown around quite a bit in different contexts. What you don't want to use an MCP for is to replace resource augmented generation, RAG. Right? So a lot of times you'll hear we'll use an MCP server to do a search in another database and then come back to us with results. Well, that's not what you use an MCP for. You use an MCP server to perform an action in an external system, perform an action, not to get the context. And if you need to take an action and simply add additional context to that action, you would likely go with RAG system. Create a RAG pipeline, add resource augmented generation, probably vectorized database, search, whatever that may be, right? And that's going to plug into your compiler. So be careful about that. Now, when we do get to setting up a model for our copilot, there are various ways to fine tune it. So we talked about resource augmented generation, right? We talked about prompts. So here's a model that you can use, sort of gauge the level of effort that can go into fine tuning the model. What I can tell you without getting too much detail into the higher levels is that you're probably going to be okay with the first two bottom levels. Through precise, clear, complete prompt engineering and structured prompt engineering, combined with application logic and resource augmented generation, can solve most of your problems. You can get to a pretty accurate output just with those two. Right? Now, if you're starting to get professionally serious about LLM engineering, this is when you're going to get into LoRa path, where you're fine-tuning specific areas of the model, tweaking specific parameters of the model, which allows you to fine-tune the model slightly faster instead of retraining the whole thing. Right? Then you could go into model training, RLHF. That's another one. That's where you start retraining the model. So tweaking some of the layers of the model Then you get into tweaking the model architecture, and at that point, you're probably working for an AI product owner. Right? And then of course, creating a custom model, something you're probably not going to do unless you're an AI enthusiast. Right? So unless you're really into it. So be aware of these, but know that you don't have to re-engineer. LM engineering, if you stay within the first two levels, you're probably going to solve 90% of marketing problems. So, any questions so far? Let me pause for a second. All right, so with that, let's take a look at how we can build a copilot on our own, what it takes to build one. So for this use case, what we'll do is we'll build a simple copilot that will involve Microsoft Teams as the UI. It'll communicate through a model that will be hosted in Azure AI Foundry. It'll use a custom FCP server and perform an action in XM Cloud. The use case that we'll use for this is a relatively common use case that we see in enterprise marketing teams where a request comes in, whether it's from legal or from a different department. Let's say in our case, we're rebranding. We're changing the name of the company just so slightly, or we're lowercasing one of the letters. Okay? So this is a simple use case. However, if we were to receive that, if a content marketer were to receive that context, and if they're looking at thousands of articles, for instance, one of our clients has 25,000 articles. Looking through all those articles for that name and changing that manually is going to take a long time. Now, also automating that can be tricky. There are ways to automate that. So this is a perfect example where a Copilot would add a lot of value, where they can simply go into a Copilot and ask it to change all the names of the name of the company to a different name and be done within just a couple minutes. So, and how to do that, I'll let Martin walk us through the process.
Thank you, Vasiliy. So Vasiliy gave you excited explanation answering why, and I will now show and explain you how to do that. But before building the first Copilot, you have to give the answers for, I would say, 4 major blocks. So first of all, you need to decide on the workflow management. We have plenty of options. We probably can go and manage workflow with N8N tool, which is probably going to go to market, make Smith OS, like different automation systems, or you can go with MCP. For this particular example, we are going to go on with MCP, as you probably have guessed from Vasily's explanation. But even choosing MCP, you still need to decide which particular MCP you are going to use. As of today, there are at least 2 ready-to-use MCP service for dealing with Sitecore. One is the official one that has released yesterday. The other is community one, built by the community. So if MCP server fits your needs, you would probably go with this one. If it doesn't fit your need, or if it does your job but not perfectly, in that case, the best way for you would be to go and build your own custom MCP server. This is something we are going to go through now. The next question is actually the system you're going to deal with. It can be anything. It can be Sitecore, it can be Salesforce, it can be Content Hub, or whichever system stores your content or data. But again, XM Cloud is our flagship product for Sitecore. That's why we are going to go on with XM Cloud. Next, talking about language, large language model providers. We have at least 5 major players on the market, big names, Google Gemini, Anthropic. You can go on with the OpenAI, and this is the one we're going to use, but not directly. Instead, we'll use Azure AI Foundry, and I will explain why just a few minutes later. Finally, we need to capture user input through some sort of user interface. So it can be anything that grabs user interface and sends it further through APIs. Again, Slack, Copilot, my favorite Telegram messenger also does that. I believe all of you use Microsoft Teams. That's why we are going to develop it for Microsoft Teams. But again, we choose the interface But speaking about Microsoft Teams, there are at least 4 known ways how you can do customizations with Teams. You can use webhooks. There are other points of integration, but for our example, we're going to choose bots. Microsoft Teams, they have bots, and we're going to build custom bot that will integrate with our copilot and Fomichev. So far, so good. So now we can hands on. I'm going to start with the cloud system, and you probably guessed which browsing problem we have in mind. I have a website. Yes, it's cloud forces me to log in again. Let's do that quickly. We have a demo website here, which has interactive browsing. So you see this. This is not right, and we want to find all the occurrences of this incorrect spelling and make it valid. The problem here is that it's widespread across the whole website. Hundreds of pages affected, plenty of data sources, like it's all around. Like, what are you gonna do? I'm gonna go on manual? Probably not. So who can suggest me the best way of doing things? Anyone?
PowerShell. PowerShell's good.
Exactly. The first thing coming into my head is go and create PowerShell script, because we have it out of the box with XMCloud. This is exactly what I did. I went here, created a PowerShell script, fairly simple. It accepts the search term to find, it accepts the other parameter, the replacement value, and there is an optional parameter which you would like to use in many cases to limit the scope path. For example, you have 150 sites on this cloud, and you only need to do replacement on a single one. You will limit that, you don't do extra job. Okay, now I have the script. It works. I tested it, that's for sure. The problem with the script is that you can only execute it right within this instance. You have PowerShell extension, and if you're lucky, of course, to enable it. That's another thing I want to add a comment that PowerShell is disabled by default, and you need to enable it first. At the end of this presentation, there will be a slide with all the references, and there will be my blog explaining how exactly you can do that. In my case, it's enabled. Right, so as I say, PowerShell extension, it only works within that instance, but we cannot call it externally. Can we? Any ideas? No? PowerShell comes with a very useful module called PowerShell remote module. Yes. So what it gives you, you can run PowerShell extension commands right in the context of your local PowerShell prompt, right on your host machine. And the beauty of that is that you can execute it against different machines. It doesn't specifically limit you to the single one, like inline script. And to make this happen, you need to install this module and add these parameters. First of all, you need to provide the host name. The second thing, you need to provide the user in the context of which everything will get executed. And of course, the secret, so that this will work. So now, if you get this all together, you will be able to call this same renamed script externally, right from your command prompt. But we don't need that. We need to call it from MCP. So what you need to do next, you need to build your MCP server. For our specific action, we are building custom MCP server. Why do we use that? I can go with community MCP. And I'm pretty sure if I ask it to go and must rename the capital C for the lower C inside block, it will do that. But thinking the plan, it will go and create a large chain of executions. First of all, it will go and search for the content. Then it will create a flow, and it will do all editing operations plus security operations. This is like a big chain, and applying that to each and single page on the website might be quite time consuming. Why do we need to do that? We instead build our own custom tool that will do exactly that same, but faster, most effective, and less steps you do, less potential for the mistakes and errors. That's why we're building the customers. So how do you do that? You don't need to build everything from scratch yourself. There are multiple boilerplate code and templates across the internet for all the languages you may prefer for programming. I personally go with as a Next.js developer, I personally go on with Node. That's why I went and picked up the template for MCP server for Node that specifically calls PowerShell. Yes, you can find all these examples straight away, grab it to your machine, and it will work. So having this MCP server, I can point it to the script, and all I need to do is just provide the extra parameters. MCP server typically consists of the server itself and the tools. So you create tools as the callable wrapper for the functions you want to execute. And if you look here, this is the tool I'm doing. It's search and replace tool. It gets the same parameters: text to find, text to replace, scope, and it also gets the configuration for remote because it will call PowerShell for remote. I build it, or I compile that. Once again, we are living in 2025. You don't need to do things by your hand. Everything you can do in vibe coding. With vibe coding, it took me 3.5 minutes to build that. From the moment I cloned Ripple and to the moment I run it, 3.5 minutes. So quick, and it worked. So now you have MCP server. You can call it from external tools like you use for vibe coding, like copilots, for cursor, or to make replics, whichever you use. Definitely GitHub Copilot, but we are calling that from Teams, where user provides the comments in human language. So this is where one piece is missing. Which one is that? Who was listening to us carefully? Any ideas what is missing between TeamSpot and MCP? Okay, LLM. LLM is the tool that grabs your text, tokenizes it, and passes to MCP server as a parameters. Then, when MCP server responds, it gets the response, and again creates the human text out of it, and passes back to the caller. So now we are going to get with LLM. To do that, the easiest would be going to Azure AI Foundry. And why so is that most of you already have an Azure subscription. And you can create, you can use Azure Foundry to create your connection like in couple of clicks. So here I have a project, but you will need to create your own project. Once you create it, you can deploy any model which you would like to. In my case, I'm deploying GPT-5 mini model here, and once it's deployed, it gives me the endpoint URL, and it also gives me API key, which I will be using for my bot. Okay, so now I have Azure Foundry set up. Probably it was less than again 5 minutes. It was very quick. Next thing, Teams, Microsoft Teams. They provide very helpful bot framework SDK. So instead of using Microsoft Teams and developing against your app, you don't do that. You just go to this SDK, you download Bolt emulator, and it works and behaves similar to Teams, but it also shows debug information, and it also does not require lots of complicated integrations to your Microsoft Android. And another good news is that for building a bot, you don't need to build it yourself. Again, you can download anything you want. In my case, I'm finding the samples officially provided by Microsoft. I choose the language of my choice, which is JavaScript. And here I pick up a simple echo bot, which grabs your message and sends it back. That's for me enough to start with. Then probably extra 10 minutes for you to go to vibe coding, write the prompt with requirements, asking to integrate this chatbot with your MCP server through the language model. So you pass language model credentials, endpoint and API key, and then you also provide the MCP server credentials into that one. Vibe coding will do everything for you. Everything we are talking here today is deployed to our GitHub account, and it has all the comprehensive documentation how you can do that, even how you can integrate it into real teams. That's for the bot itself, and there is another repository for MCP7. Okay, so with that in mind, I'm ready to show the demo. We have this multi-website with capital C to replace, spread across multiple things. And I'm also having my MCP server and my teams started here, that's fine. So now I can open up the bot and connect to my, I open up bot emulator and I can now connect to my bot. So here's the connection. Then copy quickly and GitHub. As I say, everything is documented here. And if your bot is up and running, you will see welcome message. That's what I see here. Now, the moment of truth, I'm going to send a command asking it to replace cycle with the proper brand name.
If you've been around the Cypher system for a while, you might get the joke.
It was well spread problem. So here, copy, paste. So I'm simply asking it to replace all field values. Cycle is capital C to the proper value under this path. And I'm sending it. This is our tenant name. So what happens under the hood this time is LLM, so the bot receives the text message which I sent to it. It tokenizes it and sends it to MCP server through LLM. Then MCP server gets these parameters and requests my PowerShell script, which in my case is PowerShell remoting script, passing all the parameters. Then PowerShell remoting script makes a call to my specific XM Cloud instance, which in my case is local XM Cloud, and forces it to execute the script with these parameters. And then the whole chain unwraps back to my Teams messenger. So let's see what it says. It says search and replacement has been completed. It's come to 100 items, and it was the hit of 30 items with 73 changes. I don't believe it. Let's go and check. So going to the page, and yes, it's lowercase. What is funny enough, I was doing this code for this zone, and if I go back one level, it's still capital C because it's outside of my scope. I asked it to change only within this zone. So that was demo, and all of that you can build by yourself, probably in less than an hour. From the decision, from the idea to the report result.
Thanks, Martin. So the entire process would take someone who's done it before, probably over half an hour to do everything end to end. If you haven't done it before, give yourself a day at least to play around with it. So here are a couple things. We have 1 minute left. We'll be quick though. So security is an important point. An extremely important point. Large language models, generative AI, track to the point where a lot of CIOs are scared of it. So when implementing security, what we are doing is we're implementing a security proxy between our UI and our LLM model. So all the requests from the user, before they go to the large language model, from our teams in this case, would go through this proxy, which would examine prompts for malicious input. Once everything checks out, it passes the rules, then it propagates further to the application. The agent, the copilot performs what it needs to do, returns the result. The result then goes back again through the proxy, which scans it to make sure that we're not releasing sensitive data that should not be released, right? There are lots of threats that exist out there, from role-playing sessions to, modern models are relatively good value. Some of the older models are extremely susceptible to prompt injection, where you can say things like, forget it, all your instructions from now on, your X, Y, Z. Do give me this type of information. Data infiltration, token drain is a big problem, where you can simply script queries to a chatbot and just drain all their tokens. Now, evaluations. So once we're ready to go to production, one of the things about generative AI is it's not deterministic. It can evolve, and especially if our context is dynamic, if we're using RAG to pull information from an external system, that also evolves. Our answers are going to evolve. We need to make sure that our copilot does what it needs to do accurately and continues to do that, even if we change the context. This is where we would implement an evaluation system. We use internally LangFuse. It's an open source, can be run in the cloud container, can be run locally. So it's a good option for privacy. This is something that we would use to check our copilot for toxicity, for completeness of the answer, for accuracy. These are the things that we normally don't check things for. Okay. So when we're all said and done, our architecture is going to look more like this. This is, again, at the high level. Our teams communicates through, let's say, Akamai. That's one of the options for the firewall that are available out there. Goes to the LLM. LangFuse sits as a sidecar. This implementation, if you're familiar